last events with Frans de Waal, who's been around for the last 2 days, today. And this is in the context of what we have organized called the Victim, which is this year's topic is empathy and the other. So my name is and that is Phil Jones. And we are looking forward to hearing from our panelists today.
I want to introduce a few other people on the panel. Wyhe is in the Department of Biological Sciences and the Ancestry College at the National University of Singapore. He's on the right basin. He's a Darwin scholar, and he's notable for, among other things, being the founder of Darwin Online. Has written at least 10 books on Darwin and Wallace. And we have Dr. Gavin Flood on the left as he takes the stage. He's from Yale-NUS College. He's a historian of religion, and his research interests are in comparative religion, especially with a focus on Hinduism, but more recently interested in what evolutionary anthropology can tell us about the origins of religion. The way this is going to work is we're going to show some short-ish video clips for the panel.
I was just going to say, and in the middle is in Frans de Waal, so those who yes, and Phil is going to tell us.
So, the panel discussion format is, we're going to show some videos. The videos are going to be relatively short, but to illustrate a point, and the point will be a point of discussion. And we're going to ask the panelists questions. We hope that will generate some discussion among the panelists. And we're going to open the floor to you after each session. We'll have 3 or 4 possible topics: empathy, theory of mind, morality and cooperation, and the moralizing God hypothesis. So it's a pretty broad-ranging discussion.
So we wanted to start with this video which came out in 2011, published in 2011. The central question that was so interesting asking was if non-primate mammals are capable of empathic behavior. So what the action study is, there's a video which is going to come up, and the author actually is going to describe what this study is about.
My name is Penny Mason. I'm a professor of neurobiology at the University of Chicago, and I'm really excited to share with you the results of a collaboration with Jean Desetti and Ingo Martall, where we looked at empathy and helping behavior in rats. We've known for some time that rats show the simplest form of empathy, emotional contagion, such as one baby cries, all babies cry. We wanted to see if rats would go beyond emotional contagion to actively help another rat in distress. This is really asking quite a bit of a rat, as active helping requires that the helper rat downregulate the fear he's experiencing through emotional contagion. In other words, the helper rat has to suppress his natural response of frozen immobility and actually move to help the other rat. So we put a free rat, the rat with a black dot on his head, into an arena, and in the center is his cage mate trapped in a plexiglass restrainer. The door to the restrainer can only be opened from the outside by the free rat. Here you're seeing the first 5 minutes sped up on the first day of testing. Even though it takes quite a bit of rat courage to venture into the scary arena center, the free rat persists in moving to the center and trying to figure this restrainer thing out so he can help his cage mate. So now in this clip, the rats have been in this paradigm several times. This is the 5th day of testing. And we're viewing the session in real time, but after 25 minutes have elapsed. What you see is that the free rat is very focused on the door. You will see him open the door for the first time in a moment. What I want you to notice is that the free rat freezes. He freezes because the door falls over. And since it's the first time he's opened the door, he's surprised and he startles by freezing at the sound of the falling door. There he goes. Now, after a brief exploration of the strange land of the restrainer, the liberated rat runs around exploring the arena. Wherever the liberated rat goes, the free rat follows, jumping on and licking him. For about 5 to 10 minutes, this apparent celebration continues, with the free rat very active and always in close proximity to his liberated cage mate. Here's day 12 in real time from the very start of the session. The free rat is placed in the arena, and after briefly checking that this is the same gig as every previous day, he promptly opens the door. But he no longer freezes when the door falls over, and his reaction to liberating the trapped rat quite muted, suggesting that the free rat is not surprised by the results of his actions. In another experiment that we don't show you here, we put 2 restrainers in the arena, one with a trap cage mate, one with 5 chocolate chips. Remarkably, the free rat opened both restrainers and in no consistent order. And to our shock, the free rat shared the chocolates with the liberated rat.
So, to start the discussion, a lot of what we're talking about here has to do with empathy, and kind of the role of empathy in a lot of different things. I thought I'd start with just asking Frans de Waal if he could define empathy for us, especially in, let's say, non-human primates and beyond.
Yeah. Is this working? Yeah. Well, empathy in its most basic form is that you are sensitive to the emotions of others, you respond to the emotions of others, you may even adopt the emotions of others, so that's called state matching. Psychologists often like a much more complex definition, like imagining how it is to be like the other. I'm not sure the rats are doing that here, and I don't think that's a necessary part of the definition, but the definition definitely includes sensitivity to the emotions of others. The thinking of this particular experiment is that it is based on that, in the sense that the trapped rat is distressed, and the distress is adopted by the free rat, so that's emotional contagion, that's a form of empathy. And then that motivates the free rat to open the door. And there's a few problems with the experiment, in the sense that people have argued that freeing the rat is a rewarding activity, in the sense that all of a sudden there's 2 rats who can mingle together, and they may like that, and that's a pleasant thing to do. And so people have come up with alternative explanations based on its rewarding to do this. And as soon as it's regulated by rewards, we sort of like to exclude the empathy part. But recently, 2 years ago, people have done a very different experiment with rats, which was one rat was almost drowning and the other one lifted out of the water. And in that case, they had excluded the reunion. So the reunion effect, which might be rewarding, was excluded in that experiment, and they still were doing this, the same sort of liberation action. And so now that's one argument against the reward hypothesis, and so it is probably based on empathy. And the other very strong argument comes from Bartal, who did this study. In a recent experiment, she gave an anxiolytic drug to the rats, meaning that she calms them down. So Peggy Mason's talking here about self-regulation. Basically, the anxiolytic drug does the regulation of the emotions for the rat. And all of a sudden, they don't want to liberate the other rat anymore. So when the emotions are down-regulated, they still open a container with chocolate, they still know how to open containers, and they're motivated to eat, but they're not motivated to help someone who's distressed. And so we have now 2 pieces of evidence to argue against the conditioning type of hypothesis and for the empathy hypothesis that they support.
What if I can ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions? How widely do you think empathy extends beyond, say, primates or non-primate, non-human primates, and even, do you think it extends beyond mammals?
Yeah, we started empathy. I started my empathy studies on chimpanzees long ago, and when I first mentioned the word empathy and sympathy in relation to animals, people freaked out over it. This was an impossibility. Even though anyone has a dog, thinking that the dog is empathic, so I don't know what was so upsetting about it. But we started with chimpanzees, and since chimpanzee behavior is so similar to human behavior, they don't run around like these rats, they embrace each other, and they do all sorts of things that are very human-like. And so for chimpanzees, I think the idea got accepted at some point, and then it extends to other primates. And then we started doing it in elephants, there's dog studies, there's even some bird studies that indicate empathy. And so my thinking now is that empathy is found in all the mammals. There's not an exception to it. There's some mammals where empathy is used in many relationships, like let's say a monkey group, in many different relationships. And some mammals that are solitary hunters, for example tigers and cats, and so they may have a much smaller network of empathy. But empathy is found in all the mammals. I'm at the moment involved in a fish study on empathy. AJ maybe can say something about empathy in fish. I don't exclude the possibility that fish have the same sort of mechanism going. Certainly birds, as in birds and mammals, that's pretty sure that they have that.
Gavin, I wonder if I can ask you a question, and it's kind of a general question. I wonder if you can comment on the role of empathy in moral behavior and ethics, and really sort of saying something about, can you have moral behavior without something like empathy?
Well, that's a big question. Before I address that, I'm interested in this, you've got intra-species empathy going on there, but we also have inter-species empathy, which is quite interesting. And I remember reading one of Frans's books, in which he described a bonobo in a glass enclosure, and the bird had stunned itself on the side of the glass cage, and the bonobo picked up the bird and took it up and released it. And that was such an impression on me, a sort of inter-species empathy, which is very striking. So I would have thought that morality, human morality, did indeed entail empathy. I wouldn't have thought we could have morality without empathy. And empathy was the fundamental basis of it, which is probably rooted in our biology, probably in social cohesion of some kind, which is pre-linguistic or below-linguistic.
John, I would like to address my question to you, but before that, do you want to comment on what Frans said or everything?
Well, yes, I would have one comment, which is that Darwin was the first person to propose ideas like this of other animals having empathy, but he attributed that to social animals, and he believed that empathy was something existent in social creatures, and that it would naturally arise in social groups. But you're saying that even solitary creatures have empathy, so that how can creatures that do not live in social groups, why would they have any empathy?
Well, we think that empathy started in the mammals at least with maternal care. And so the female, whether she's a mouse or an elephant, she needs to pay attention to the emotions of the offspring. When the offspring is cold or in danger or hungry, and they vocalize usually when that happens. And they need to be responsive to these emotions. And that explains the maternal origin of it, explains two things about empathy, which is that it's usually more a female characteristic than a male. It's stronger in females, and humans also. In many human studies, it's a stronger female characteristic. And also the oxytocin connection, oxytocin being very much a maternal hormone that is used in nursing and things like that. And so oxytocin plays a role in it. So we think it started with maternal care, and maternal care is something that all the mammals have, whether you're solitary or not. But we do think that once the mechanism existed, it could be expanded and used in other relationships that are not offspring relationships. So males can have empathy, and there's empathy possible between individuals, even individuals who are not related, or as you mentioned, even individuals or different species, because once the mechanism exists, it can be applied in all sorts of situations. And so social animals, like what Darwin would say, they obviously have more relationships in which it applies and in which it is needed than a solitary animal.
That was the question I was asking. What do you think Darwin said in his book related to the expression of emotions in man and animals? Did he consider empathy as present in all animals? Is that something which he suggested?
He suggested that the origin of these instincts and of morality and social morality came from social interaction, from social species. And he first put this forward in his book, The Descent of Man, in 1871. One thing I find quite pleasing in all of these studies and in Frans's works is how familiar it is, how Darwinian it is. But on the other hand, it's a bit depressing that you have to work so hard to convince the scientific community and the public that other species are moral, and yet this message was first put out by Darwin himself and was not widely accepted. In fact, for over a century, he's been laughed at as anthropomorphizing animals for this and other things, because people thought he attributed too many human-like ways of thinking and behaving to other species.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, it seems that he's being proven right. And I think the charge of anthropomorphization is not really fair for Darwin, after all, since he's stressing that human beings come from other species and that everything we possess, everything that we are, is from earlier species. And so he strongly denied that we have anything that is unique. Everything, he said, that we have is present to some degree in other species. You used the quote in your talk the other night from The Descent of Man, that the difference between humans and other species is one of degree, not of kind.
So Darwin was very affected by David Hume, the philosopher. I think maybe because he studied for a while in Edinburgh. That's a Scottish philosopher. And David Hume was very pro-animal, first of all. And David Hume also thought that the moral sentiments, morality comes out of the emotions, basically. In philosophy nowadays, Hume is not the dominant force. It's Kant, Immanuel Kant, who likes to think that everything is done by reasoning and logic, even though the Kantians now try to backtrack a little bit on that. But there is a preponderance in philosophy to think about logic and reasoning and principles and top-down thinking, I call it top-down thinking about morality. And as a result, Darwin's ideas about morality sort of have disappeared because they are Humean. And there's still a very strong stream in philosophy that doesn't want to hear about the role of the emotions. And we have that whole discussion was broken up recently, broken open by Paul Bloom. I don't know if you followed that. Have you followed that, Paul Bloom? Paul Bloom is an American psychologist at Yale. Hey, that's a good actually. At Yale University, who has written a book against empathy. He's against empathy. He feels empathy is too narrow. Empathy is biased. As I explained in the talk on Monday, empathy is biased. It's easier to have empathy for individuals who are close to you and who are similar to you. That's easier, but it doesn't mean it's impossible to have empathy for groups that are different from you. And yes, empathy is biased, but without empathy, I don't know, without empathy you're not even interested in somebody else. Why would I be interested in other beings around me if I don't have any resonance with their emotions? And so without empathy, you can try to build a moral system, but it's going to be a moral system based purely on reasoning and logic. I can't see that. Because with reasoning and logic, we humans, we can reason ourselves in every corner in the world. For example, slavery. From a reasoning economics perspective, slavery is perfectly fine. I don't see any problem with it. And it's actually only because we had empathy for the slaves that slavery was abolished. Lincoln, the president in the US who helped abolish slavery, was very strongly affected by a visit that he had made to the south of the US where he had seen slaves. And he wrote in his letters that this bothered him tremendously. So that's an empathy reaction that he had. And that is always the source of, I think, human morality, and without it, I'm not sure we ever get there.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
I just wanted to add that I'm sure you're onto something with Hume, but I think one of the prime reasons why Darwin has been dismissed in that respect is, of course, the strong resistance against his push against human uniqueness. And by saying that the particularly precious and supposedly unique human traits are present in other animals, there's a knee-jerk reaction against that. And it's been rejected ever since. And as you know, many other things about humans which are supposedly unique, and when someone claims that they're present in other species, there's always a strong reaction. Because there's this unending desire for many people to have human beings unique and separate and distinct from nature.
But unique in things that we like about ourselves.
Oh yes.
So if humans kill each other, we say we're like animals. So as soon as we do negative things and violence and dominance and aggression and territoriality, that's the animal side of the human. And the noble things, the wonderful things that we do, that's the human side of things. Yeah.
Against the idea of against empathy is that we as a species recognize empathy as fundamental to who we are. And indeed, there's the whole psychology of people who don't have empathy, autism and so on. So there's a whole spectrum. Yeah. And as a species, it seems that we recognize the fundamental nature of empathy for us. And we try to treat people who don't have it.
Actually, I have a question related to that, but maybe we could take a couple of questions from the audience if somebody wants to ask a question now. Other thoughts?
Showing my own bias here outside the room, sort of. Could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Mr. Bhaskar. I work at the Institute of Molecular Cell Biology. I'm a molecular biologist. My question is, I think you touched on it, interspecies empathy. Now, we spend, as humans, millions of dollars and hours taking care of pandas, and we spend just as much time trying to kill rats. In my opinion, a rat is just as cute as a panda. Now, is there some sort of a genetic basis to our care of one species and not the other? Or is this just a fashion of the moment and we go with the crowd?
Yeah, panda is overrated. But it's cute to see. Yeah, we are very affected by the appearance of animals. And so we have a lot more sympathy for certain animals that we find cuddly than for other animals. A crocodile is not a shark, we're not so fond of those animals. Yeah, that's always an issue. Animals that harm us, like rats. We know rats harm us by eating food supplies and contaminating things and spreading diseases and so on. So animals that harm us, we are particularly nasty to those. Even though rats, as you see in this particular video, rats are just as sociable. When I was a student, I had rats as pets. They make wonderful pets. They listen to their name. It's not a good animal to pick up girls, I noticed. A panda would be much better for it. But they are just mammals and they're very, very nice and social animals, basically. Yeah, we are very biased to that.
Wouldn't empathy towards cute and cuddly creatures be similar to the greater tendency to have empathy for those in the in-group as opposed to those in the out-group? So
well,
cuddly
it's maybe
things
also
are honorary members of our in-group.
It's maybe also a vulnerability effect. There's this early work by Conrad Lawrence who said that we have this infant appeal, and so if animals have rounded features and big eyes, and you see that in Disney, it's completely built on animals with big eyes and rounded features like Mickey Mouse and so on. We are very attracted to that, and the panda with its black around the eyes is sort of the infant appeal is right there. So we fall for that. For example, the attraction of humans to cats, even though cats don't obey and don't do anything for us, is often explained in that particular way.
There could be a deeply bias against reptiles, I think, in response to your question. We turn away from reptiles and snakes and lizards and so on. And we're much more empathetic towards mammals.
And that's also partly because they don't return the empathy. So empathy is very strongly present in the mammals, and that's why we like cats and dogs for that reason. We respond to their emotions, they respond to our emotions. But fish, for example, sorry Asia, but I have a lot of fish at home. They don't give me a lot of empathy. And that's just not part of their interaction pattern. Yeah.
or because we don't have other terms at the moment? And are you completely comfortable with the usage of these terms when we as humans are the ones doing the defining with all our cognitive sophistication and then ascribing the terms to the animals when we have to be inferential about their behavior? Do you think we're losing anything by doing this?
Yeah, I started that work with chimpanzees. Now, chimpanzees are almost identical to humans genetically. So, for chimpanzees, I never felt that I needed to postulate a different mechanism. If chimpanzees embrace someone who is screaming and has lost a fight, and humans embrace someone who is screaming and has lost a fight, it's very similar behavior under very similar circumstances, and there's not enough time between these two species. They split 6 million years ago. There has not been enough time for them to evolve very complex, similar-looking behavior based on different mechanisms. I cannot see that. So for chimpanzees, I feel I have to go with homology, as we call it, meaning that it is genetically related and neurologically related and so on. Now, if you go to species like the elephant, maybe the mechanism is different. They may be doing something similar and maybe the mechanisms are different. Even though when we recently did our rodent study, we did a study on voles, the neurobiology seemed very similar between the voles and the humans. So even for the voles, I would say, even though that's a rodent, I would say that probably the mechanisms are homologous. Now the sophistication of the mind, that's a different issue. When we started writing this Stephanie question about the evolution of empathy, we proposed what we call a Russian doll model, is that the core mechanism is the same across all the mammals, but then on top of that layers are built, so you get not just that you are sensitive to the emotions of others, but you want to understand where they come from, and even you want to understand that the other one is thinking and feeling, which gets us to the theory of mind. So those are more complex capacities that probably the rodents don't have. And we think that the apes have them and that humans have them, but maybe not all. So the Russian doll model basically would postulate that the core is the same across all the mammals, but these outer layers, they may vary, and some animals have more of them than others.
One more.
I'm Ken Kahn, computer scientist at the University of Salisbury. We heard about how all the mammals, the maternal possible origin, but I'm wondering, some birds like cuckoos don't take care of their young, or some fish do take care of their young, and some don't. So has anybody looked to see whether empathy exists for those species that don't take care of their young?
No, the empathy work has just started, and so there's a few mammals that have been investigated. The birds, maybe 3 bird species that I know of. In birds, since there's a lot of paternal care, I would not expect as strong as the sex differences we have in the mammals, where mammals is very much, female care is very much needed and obligatory. So in birds it may be different in terms of the sex differences, but the empathy work on animals has only just started, and people have not been sampling a whole bunch of species yet.
I'm going to ask just a little bit of a follow-up question if I can. I think one of the things that makes it easier, potentially, to study empathy in humans than non-humans is, of course, we've got language or something like it. And that makes me think how far you can reach out with studies of empathy, and my mind goes to bees. So it's not necessarily what the influence of empathy on morals is, the influence of empathy on, let's call it something like ethics, something like rules. You know, bees have rules, they follow rules. They care for their young, they care for each other, they protect each other, they actually give up their life for each other, they patrol each other if they do things that are bad, they punish each other. So they have all of these rules that sound, you know, if not moral, they sound kind of ethical. They sound like there's some sort of behavior patterns that are following certain rules. And, you know, we don't think that bees have empathy yet.
become activated. If that's the case, it's a sort of analog to empathy in the sense that the distressed state of the ant is transferred to the other ants, not by an empathy mechanism, but by a pheromonal mechanism. So yeah, it would be an analog rather than a homolog.
So we probably need to move to the next topic, but I'll quickly ask a question on this topic. So if there were to be a fish which would release another trapped fish, would we then consider that fish to be more empathic than they are now?
An altruistic fish.
What would we see?
Well, I don't exclude it. In all the vertebrates, I think many of these mechanisms are much older than we think. In all the vertebrates, there's the possibility of this, and as I said, I'm involved in a fish study on empathy. And we're doing basically the same thing as with the Waal study. So who knows? If there's fish who are attached to each other, like you have a pair bond. And as soon as you get these attachments, you can be affected by the emotions of others. You have to be coordinated to some degree. So I don't exclude that at all. Yeah.
Before we leave empathy, we've spoken almost exclusively about the possession of it or not in various species, but I think we've skipped what good is it, particularly for social species. Why is it beneficial?
Well, for the maternal care, of course, that's pretty obvious.
For social groups. For social groups.
In social groups. Well, let's say I live in a social group and I depend on others for hunting or defense or finding food, which is why we live in groups, basically. Why humans live in groups and primates live in groups. Then, in that case, I have an interest in the well-being of my groupmates. I have an individual interest in that, in the sense that if my groupmates are doing well, I can rely on them and cooperate with them and do things together with them. If they don't do well, I have a problem. If they are sick or injured. And so that's also why aggression needs to be limited within the group. You cannot just beat up everyone and injure them because you will lose your partners, basically. And empathy is needed to take care of those that you depend on. So we, in biology, we usually think that empathy is an advantageous mechanism. So it has benefits, otherwise it wouldn't exist. So it has benefits, but once it exists and is used in all sorts of relationships, we sometimes can use it outside of those. And that's why we, for example, sometimes take care of animals. So for example, when a whale is stranded, we're going to help the whale to get back into the ocean, which is certainly not why empathy evolved. I think it also depends on the circumstances. If humans are very hungry and a whale strands, I can tell you, we're not going to push it back into the ocean. We're going to do other things with the whale. So, dependent on the circumstances, we can apply the empathy mechanism to other species, but that's not how it evolved. It evolved in the context of close relationships.
So related to empathy is another phenomenon called theory of mind. And the theory of mind is something we've alluded to in this conversation so far. And kind of generally speaking, it's the idea that one individual has a notion or belief that another individual is thinking, is a thinking being. And especially it has some idea of what the other animal is thinking, even an individual, because who knows, maybe there's theory of mind in plants. But it has some notion that the other animal is thinking, even if the other animal is disagreeing, or thinking something that the first individual is not thinking. And again, this is something that we have ourselves all the
only people can understand someone else had the wrong idea about something. This experiment was set up to test other primates can do this. The subjects watch the drama play out, and their eye movements are tracked to see what they expect the players to do. They sip juice from a thick straw, which pulls them still enough that their gaze can contract. The dramatic conflict in this environment keeps the primate interested. They need to be invested enough to closely watch the scene. Adding an ape-like creature reminiscent of King Kong and some social conflict was just enough to keep their attention. Here's what happens in an ape soap opera, step by step. First, the human shows interest in a rock. Note the chimp observer in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Its eyes are being tracked through this entire process. Then the mysterious primate moves in and takes the rock, making a lot of noise as it does so. The red dots show the chimp is watching the scene intently. The human and the chimp both watch the mystery primate hide the rock onto the left box. Then the human suddenly leaves. While the human is gone, the chimp watches the rock being moved. The red dots show all these motions are being tracked until finally the rock is removed altogether. The chimp sees the person coming back into the room and reaching for the boxes. Where does the chimp think the person is going to look for the rock? According to its gaze, the chimp looks on the left, even though it knows the rock is gone. In a series of these trials, all three species of apes tested, orangutans, chimps, and bonobos, looked where they thought the human would go, suggesting that these apes recognized a false belief in another mind. According to this research, non-human apes appear to understand that individuals have unique perceptions about the world. The person doesn't know the rock is gone, so the ape looks where they think the person is. This finding suggests that these apes too have some understanding of what's happening in another individual's mind, and threatens to tip theory of mind off the human-only pedestal.
So, Frans, you comment about the stories of Mr. Waal. And one of the things you usually point out is that the difficulty in designing good experiments where things like this can be tested.
Yeah.
And if I'm not wrong, so in monkeys, this theory of mind aspect hasn't been shown yet. And do you think, so again, going back to something related to what you were talking about, so is it a question of the degree of how much of theory of mind a particular animal has, or is it like a yes or no question that is it going to be that monkeys could, whatever experiments we design, we don't find that it's known or yet?
Well, theory of mind, even though it's used very widely in psychology, came out of the ape studies. So many psychologists don't even know where it came from, but it started with work on chimpanzees. And the first paper that uses the term theory of mind is a paper on a chimpanzee named Sarah. And ever since we have had so many debates about do chimps have it, yes or no, there was a whole period where it was denied, and people said only humans have theory of mind and became one of the defining characteristics of our species. Then there were some experiments where they confirmed actually some sort of theory of mind in chimpanzees based on behavioral interactions. These studies were actually done at Yale-NUS, where I worked at the time. But people had trouble with the false belief task. This became, it's almost like the goalposts were being moved, like, okay, chimpanzees have theory of mind. The term comes after all from the ape word. But do they know anything about false beliefs? That became sort of the critical issue. In the sense of, it's not only that I know what he knows, but if he has the wrong knowledge, do I know that? Do I notice that? Or do I have any inkling of that? That became sort of the critical test, and no one knew how to test this in the apes. This was an impossibility, and we got stuck. And for the last 20 years, sort of, we were stuck. Yes, they have probably theory of mind with the false beliefs, and we have no idea. Now, this experiment uses a new technique, which is the eye tracking. So all of a sudden we can do experiments now that are very different from before. We just, and it is inspired by a child study actually that used eye tracking. We tracked exactly where these apes, because it was done on 3 different ape species, exactly where they look in the scene, and do they anticipate, by looking at certain aspects, do they anticipate where the human actor is going to look for things? And do they even anticipate that when that human actor has false beliefs? And that's what they demonstrated, which is an enormous step forward. In human children, it was thought that theory of mind only came up at the age of 4 or 5, which was when human children passed the false belief task. But now we know from eye tracking studies that children of 2 years old can pass this particular test. So now we have finally the tools in hand to look at this. I personally don't like the term theory of mind at all. I think it has nothing to do with theories. I don't think animals have theories about us, or we have theories about each other. I think it's all body-based. And that's the whole experiment. If you look at the experiment, the whole experiment is body-based. It's like the bodies move an object, and where do you look at the body, and where do you look at the objects? And so this whole theory aspect I don't like. I think a lot of interaction between humans and between apes is body understanding of what bodies do. And so I call it perspective taking. You take the perspective of the other, but theory of mind is for me a bad term. Whether monkeys they can do it, you ask that. I personally doubt that they will do this. But with all these characteristics, it always ends up being more widespread. People have talked about theory of mind in corvids and the crow family. There are certain monkey studies that indicate a little bit of this. So even though I'm skeptical that we're going to ever find this in the monkeys, I cannot exclude it.
This kind of cognitive investigation can happen more than once. Right? So if, let's say, in a particular lineage you see it, and you see it in corvids, it's not necessarily that they're related through evolution with us, right?
Yeah, but I think there's many levels of understanding others. If we move away from the term theory of mind and speak of perspective taking, there are experiments. We did, for example, an experiment on capuchin monkeys where they take the perspective of somebody else. What we did is an experiment where a capuchin monkey could share food with another one, and would either see the other one eat food before, or see the other one just sitting there. And they prefer to share with one who has not eaten before. And that indicates that they have some sort of understanding of the hunger state of the others. We ruled out that it was based on the behavior of the other, so it was just based on their knowledge. And so they prefer to share food with those who have not eaten. And I think we humans would be the same. If I have a big pizza and you sit across the table from me and you have not eaten, I'm willing to share with you. But if I've just seen you eating a whole pizza by yourself, I'm not very eager to share with you.
John, did you have a question?
Well, I have a comment, and perhaps a better way of describing this than theory of mind would be to refer to awareness, being aware of what others know or what they have seen. I remember reading about a species of monkey, I can't remember which one, in which you had an alpha male who wouldn't tolerate any of the younger males to try to mate. However, there was a secret liaison where one of the females was willing, and the younger male crouched behind a rock, knowing that the alpha male was over there but could not see him because there was a rock in the way, and they had their meeting. Because he was aware that it was safe to do this because there was something in the way of the vision of the alpha male. But that seems to me extremely similar, that the young male knows that the alpha male does not know what he's doing because he can't see, right? And what's the difference?
Yeah, that's perspective taking, and that's all part of that same picture in my mind. Yeah.
I always thought that theory of mind implies a kind of process of inference. Now, that last example, I suppose it does in a way have an inference that over there, in the other person, the other body, is like mine. So, but I through a process of inference, which argues all entailed by motion theory, right? So, like Frans, I'm a bit, I don't like phrase theory, right, because it implies this sort of logical inferential process in which you infer that there's another line, right line over there, as it were. I think that our interaction is much more immediate than that.
So another way to explain something like the sneaky chimp would be, I'm thinking of a different example. I'm thinking of an example with cats. Cats aren't social. But, cats sneak up on all sorts of things, including each other. And they have this very stereotyped stalking behavior, which seems to be effective. And that's probably some combination of trial and error and genetics that yields this particular behavior. And yet, I'm not sure a lot of us would be comfortable from that evidence alone that cats, for example, have a theory of mind about rabbits or a theory of mind about mice or something like that. And yet they still adopt this kind of very stereotyped behavior, which you could interpret as them understanding that if they don't do this, a rabbit will see them or a mouse will run away. And that's in some ways that the trial and error is I'm going around to circuitously the point, is similar to one kind of monkey having its galleons behind some sort of screen so that the dominant male can't see them. I think a lot of people, the default is that animals are automatons, and sort of that in mind, I'm trying to think of all the ways you could twist that machine-like reasoning into things that are easy to say are theory of mind, including the dominant view when Darwin wrote his things. And so I was wondering, John, if with kind of that in mind, what do you think Darwin would think of this video?
First of all, I think he would be amazed by
the technology alone.
But let me answer your cat point first. I'm a big cat fan myself. The stalking behavior is instinctive, and they will stalk inanimate objects in this crouched way and so on. The point I think we need to pay attention to for this question is whether they would change their stalking behavior if the prey looked in their direction. Would they be? Yes. So they know whether the prey is looking at them or not. Tigers will only attack prey that is looking in the other direction, including humans. In fact, the best defense against being attacked by a tiger is to wear a big pair of fake eyes in the back of your head, because they won't leap at the eyes. They will leap at something that's looking the other way. So they are aware whether or not they can be seen, and so they will stop in their stalking until the thing looks in the other direction, and they'll continue stalking. So they know that the prey can see them or not.
But you just said that if you have fake eyes, they won't jump out those fake eyes, and in that case they don't know that the prey can't see them. Lots of things have eye spots.
Indeed, lots of things have fake eye spots in the backs of their heads because of this exact reason.
But that's a bit of a shortcut to say that the tiger knows that it can be seen. The tiger has learned probably that attacking an object where he doesn't see the eyes is, meaning that it's looking the other way, is an easier.
From trial and error.
Yeah, that would be the simplest explanation. And to assume that the tiger knows that you can see and all that stuff. People have tested it out. Actually, that's another Yale. This is another example. He has tested this out with monkeys, with rhesus monkeys. Do they react to being seen or not being seen? And she has a systematic data on that. And for the monkeys, maybe that applies, that they have an understanding of the seeing part. I'm not sure about the tiger.
Okay, I'll answer your question now about this video. I'm sure Darwin would have been delighted, because this would have confirmed his views that other species have the same or analogous abilities to us, perhaps on the same degree, but they have the same kinds of things. And Darwin relates a story which I myself have always been rather skeptical of this, but it is an example of theory of mind, you might say. I hate the phrase too. In dogs, he tells a story of a group of dogs in a family, and there's a small one, and the big one's wrong eating the food, and the small one can't get in there and get any food. So it ran out into the yard and barked loudly as if there was an intruder. All the other dogs, they ran out into the yard, started barking as well, and the small one came in and then got the food. And Darwin attributed this to cleverness, that the small one deceived the big ones into thinking there was an intruder. Personally, I think there's a simpler explanation that maybe the little dog actually just heard something and barked. The others ran out as well, and then noticing the others were gone, he went to have something to eat. What do you think?
Well, there are many studies of the false alarm calls. Yeah. So birds do that, and even some insects, I believe, they give false.
But they do it intentionally.
Yeah. I don't think that you need to be extremely smart for that. I think you just learn that if you give an alarm call, everyone flies away, and so all of a sudden now you think, well, that's maybe a good thing to do when I'm eating, you know.
And there are birds who trick meerkats with this.
Huh?
There are birds in Africa who will trick meerkats by giving an alarm call, meaning that the meerkats understand there's an eagle coming. The meerkats all run for it, and then the bird swoops down and grabs the food, but they'll only fall for that trick once.
There's only so many times that you can do this. There's a limit to deception.
Okay, so we established that nobody likes this Darren, so it would seem like interpreting others' emotions or others' notion of what their intention is potentially is very important to figure out how to interact with them morally. Do you think it is possible to have moral behavior without having the term theory of mind, the concept of theory of mind? Would it be possible to have moral behavior?
Probably not. I think you need emotional empathy, and because we're language learning creatures, we have some kind of theory of mind implicit in the sense that for us to have a moral community, we have to be able to keep a promise, for example. We have to know what it is to make a promise and to keep it. We have to know what it is to break a promise. And so I think that's fundamental to a kind of moral community. But it's based on a kind of empathy, I think it's based on our fundamental pro-sociality as biological beings, but it's mediated through language and through culture and so on. I imagine chimpanzees have culture, they're about the topic, but we certainly have cultures, and culture mediates those biological proclivities at that level. So it is fundamental, I think, to have that. We have to be able to know what it is to keep a promise and know what it is to break one.
So a lot of what we talk about among ourselves has to do with what we eat, and that has to do with various kinds of vegetarianism or not vegetarianism. But there seems to be at least a strain among some of us that what we eat or how we treat animals depends on this notion of sort of the cognitive sophistication of animals. And I wonder if you want to comment on that a little bit, Gavin. So there's an ethical issue of whether animals feel the same as we do, see the same as we do, and how we treat the animals related to that.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm a vegetarian, but I wear the shoes, I've got the development, so I'm still confidence. But I do think there is a big issue with regard to how we treat animals and how we manage animals. If we're going to eat them, we have to treat them right and so on. So I think that's absolutely correct. And if we have the knowledge that the kind of work that Professor de Waal is presenting to us, I think it makes us rethink our relationship with animals, and we have to think deeply about that. They're not sort of automations, Descartes once wrote. They are creatures akin to us in many ways, and because of that fundamental kinship with other creatures, I think that does raise questions about how we treat them.
So, other questions related to this segment? We can take maybe one or two questions before we.
Can I just throw in a bit then? I think the question of we have nowadays about how we treat animals or how we should treat animals is similar to Fran's point about how we treat the beached whale. Nowadays, we go and push it back in, but for the 99.99% of human history would have run down there and hacked it up and gladly eaten it. And that has also been the case for animal welfare entirety of human history, this has not been an issue. They have been treated like objects, mostly, except for pets. It's only in the middle of the 19th century that the views that are current today began to emerge. And I think it's because of the reason I think you attributed to the whale, which is our circumstances now, that we are in the circumstances in which we can be that way. So it was only when people became affluent enough and had enough distance from animals, they wouldn't walk on farms anymore, but rather lived in a middle-class home in London, and became cross when they saw the coachman whipping the horse, which they've always been doing. But those people were the first to become outraged by that kind of thing and passed the first laws to protect animals from beating and so on and so forth. This is a very new development, and I think it's context dependent.
Well, I think the earlier change was the change from hunting to agriculture. So when we were hunters, a hunter has respect for animals, even though he kills the animal. He needs to approach it, the animal can escape, the animal can be smart, and so there's a certain respect for that. The animal can counterattack, which is even worse. And so hunters have a different relationship with animals than farmers. When we became farmers, we started to control the animals and keep them in certain pens and feed them and dominate them. And this whole thing of domination over nature, which is a very Christian idea, we're the dominant force, is a farmer's idea. It's not a hunter's idea. And I think when we became farmers, we developed this different relationship with animals. And we needed to justify what we did to them, and we did that by calling them dumb animals. Part of the resistance to the study of animal cognition and animal intelligence is that if they become too smart, if we say that, like by my work, if you say that they're smart and sensitive, can we still do what we're doing to them? Let me give you an interesting illustration. I was recently in Vienna, where for the longest time, for a couple of years, they've had the Clever Dog Lab, and they do studies on dogs. People bring their dogs, they're tested, and everyone wants their dog to be extremely smart, of course, so they get a certificate at the end that they are the smartest dog in the city or something like that, and then they leave again. And so that's called the Clever Dog Lab. Now, the same group of scientists, they wanted to start testing pigs in the same way, and they called it the Clever Pig Lab. But the university withdrew the name because they got complaints from the farmers. The farmers didn't want to have a Clever Pig Lab in the city. It had to be just a pig lab. And that is because, can we still eat the pigs if they become clever pigs, you know? So that's an issue, is that the resistance to studies of animal intelligence is partly fed by moral constraints, basically, based on what we do with animals.
What's that? To John's point, that's right, the historical contextualization of empathy and morality is important. But I think it may go back older, more deeply in human beings. I was thinking of in Indian religions, you have something like a religion like Jainism, which goes back to about 500 BC, which had this notion of ahimsa, non-violence, towards other creatures. So you sweep the ground in front of you so you don't kill any insects, and you cover your mouth in case you drink any small creatures. So that strikes me as a fundamentally empathetic move towards other creatures. One reason is, of course, if you kill them, you get bad karma, you have to pay for that action. But I think that there's also a genuine kind of empathy for the creature itself. So although it is historically situated, I suspect these impulses are quite deep within human beings that go back a long way.
I have one question here.
Hi, my name is Erica. I'm a PhD student animals or to conscious creatures? Thank you.
For who is the question? So consciousness, the problem with consciousness is that no one knows what it is. So I'm willing to say that an elephant is conscious, but I have no way of empirically getting at it. Because I don't know what it is. Consciousness is a sort of subjective state. I know that I am conscious. I don't even know if you are conscious. You tell me you're conscious, I'm willing to believe it, but I have no direct evidence except for what you tell me. And I don't trust people very well, so I'm so glad I work with animals who don't talk. It's very hard for me. The only thing I can say is that there are certain things that we humans do that we cannot do unconsciously. So, for example, planning for the future. If you plan a party tomorrow for 10 people and you're going to buy stuff for that, you need to do that consciously. Otherwise, you cannot do that. Thinking back in time to specific events, of like, let's say your wedding day or whatever, what kind of weather it was on the wedding day, you have to be conscious to do that. Metacognition, thinking about what you know. So you get a question and you know already whether you can answer the question yes or no. That's called metacognition. There are certain things that for which we cannot do without consciousness. And since we now have evidence for planning in animals and thinking back, which is called episodic memory, or metacognition, we have evidence for these things from empirical experiments. For me, it's very likely that the animals do that in a conscious way also. It's very hard for me to imagine that a chimpanzee can plan ahead, usually for a couple of hours, without doing that consciously, whereas I need to be conscious to do it. So for me, that is maybe evidence for consciousness, sort of roundabout, with some indirect evidence. Because in a direct way, I don't know what to do with it, and there's many neuroscientists who work on consciousness, and if you listen, philosophers who talk about consciousness, if you listen to them, you never get a clear answer. You can push them as much as you want, you never get a good answer of what it really is, because it's a wonderful word, but we have no good definition of it.
I absolutely agree. I feel exactly the same way. I think that a lot of mileage is achieved by using the word consciousness, but without any real traction, because no one can define or be certain about what it is. Darwin played around with the word consciousness, but in a very materialist way. He wrote in one of his notebooks that consciousness is simply the behavior of the brain. And he wrote, "Oh, you materialists," which would have been a very radical, unenviable thing to be called in his day. But for him, what the philosophers and theologians would have referred to as consciousness was simply something brainless. And I'm happy with that.
Brainless?
Sorry?
It was brainless for them?
No, consciousness is simply something that the brain does for Darwin. Whereas for his opponents, it was some uniquely and divinely endowed property possessed only by human beings.
Yeah, that's of course the issue. When people say only humans are conscious, then I don't really know what they're talking about. Because if that's the case, you wonder how it got into the humans and where it comes from. And since no one defines it clearly, that's a sort of empty statement. Only humans are conscious. And briefly, we talk about empathy and morality, and I'm sort of losing track of it, but I think respect is also part of human morality. Do you respect someone or something? And so, for example, a 500-year-old oak tree. I don't have a lot of empathy for an oak tree, because I don't see how the oak tree has feelings and everything. But I do have respect for a 500-year-old oak tree. And I think respect is another issue that we don't usually bring up, but we tend to respect animals that live long and have big brains and have complex cognition. We tend to respect them more. It's not just an empathy issue. We respect an elephant that is 75 years old, in the same way that we respect certain plants that are, there's some trees that are 1,000 years old. So we have respect for certain things. And that also figures into our morality. It's not purely empathy.
With that question of consciousness is the last question. It's been going on for thousands of years, really. So not sure what to say about it, but one thing in the human case is language. I think that's terribly important. That perhaps, as you were saying the other day, marks us out from some other species. We may share everything, so but we also have language and complex language works in our lives, which does distinguish us to some extent.
More psychologists again. I just have a question specific to the eye tracking experiments for both apes and infants. How do you account for the possibility that maybe what we see there is that the ape or the infant is detecting or becoming familiar with a low-level perceptual setup, whereby they associate the placement of the rock with the human in the room at that time, which is quite different from theory of mind, right? It may have nothing to do with reading the perspective of the human in that setup. It's more just an association of rock in this location when human is in the room, and it's like a perceptual familiarity, basically.
Oh, that is completely excluded in the experiment. The experiment, what they do in this kind of experiments usually is the animals are trained on certain very simple things where the eye tracking is important, and they can test the eye tracking on, and they can test the animal's choices on that. And then you throw a completely new situation at them. And you usually only measure it once, their reaction. You have to look at the original paper, which was published in Science, but you usually measure only once or twice maximally what they're doing in those particular conditions, because you don't want the training effect. That's what you're talking about, sort of association effect. You want to avoid that. You're very sensitive to trying to avoid that.
So first question.
Hi, I'm Rick Will. I'm an economic anthropologist by training, attached at USU at the moment. And I'm really glad you brought up deception in the previous section. That's because when you have a theory of mind and empathy, when you can anticipate other people's or other agents' actions, it opens up a lot more than sharing behavior or kind of stroking each other. It also opens up things like bribery, guilt, bad bargaining, and bad faith. It brings up a whole raft of other ways that humans relate to each other. And I know you've seen many of these behaviors like bribery among chimpanzees and close relatives. And I'm wondering how much further you're willing to extend that, or has it been extended beyond primates, great apes?
Specifically bribery?
Bribery, rewards for good behavior, a full range of ways that actually humans bring up children as a way of training them.
You bribe them a lot?
Yeah. Maybe more in the United States than here. But it is pretty common. But also think about begging or cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Those are not necessarily much beyond the kinds of capabilities that you described.
Yeah, no, that's entirely true. So bribery in the sense of, for example, rewarding, a sort of interesting experiment which was done on both children and chimpanzees. In both cases, if you do a task, let's say I'm cleaning the table with an object and I drop the object, a child will pick it up for me and give it to me. That's a helpful action, altruistic And chimp will do the same thing if it's a tame chimp that knows you. And when they did in the child experiment, I remember they would reward the children for that kind of behavior. And then it disappeared. So the funny thing is that the children were willing to do this helpful action, but if they got rewards for it, their tendency disappeared. So bribery is not always a positive. It doesn't always have a positive effect. We do know, for example, for chimpanzees, intentional bribery. There were studies in the wild, in a group of wild chimpanzees, where the alpha male was alpha male for 12 years, which is an unusually long time. And according to the scientists who studied him, he had a whole bribery system. He would confiscate the prey. If a male chimp had captured the prey, he would try to get it. And as soon as he had it, he would start to hand out pieces to his friends and supporters, and not to those males and not to those females who did not support him. So he had a whole bribery system worked out, and that's how they think he kept his position so long. I've never heard of that kind of fairly intentional reward system being developed in monkeys or other species, but I wouldn't exclude it. I don't think that's excluded, the kind of intentionally rewarding actions that are beneficial to you.
Okay, so there's a lot of ground we've covered, but we want to steer the conversation towards religion. So, Frans, I want to start with you. You have described and rejected something you call the Wyhe hypothesis. And could you elaborate on that and your reasons to reject it?
Yeah, veneer theory is a bit like, I use that term for a certain period in biology, the 1970s and 1980s, where we had the selfish gene, Richard Dawkins, and we had other biologists who all said that deep down we are competitive and nasty and unfriendly and only out for ourselves. And if we are ever kind and friendly, that's just to make a good impression on others, and that is just to get favors back. The typical line that was quoted over and over in the literature was scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed. That was the line that everyone used, and they were so happy with it. And I always thought that was a good line for a psychopath. Humans as psychopaths. And basically, if you read Richard Dawkins in that time, I'm not sure it's still the case, but if you read these books, what is described is human psychopaths. But that was taken as the typical human. The typical human was not altruistic, was not kind, was not friendly, was not empathic. And that is what I call veneer theory. So basically, our kindness is just a little varnish over a human nature that is not friendly and not kind at all. Around the year 2000, all of this changed. Around the year 2000, all of a sudden, the anthropologists and the psychologists discovered that humans are actually very cooperative. That actually cooperation is our default behavior. Even when we meet strangers, but certainly with individuals that we know, the first thing we like to do is cooperation, and competition comes in only secondarily. So all of a sudden, humans were declared as actually altruistic, and the term super cooperators was used for humans by some people. They kept the animals out of that change. So they changed, and humans were so cooperative and so altruistic, but animals were different. Animals were still as selfish and competitive as they always have been. And so one of my tasks in my work has been to demonstrate that actually animals are also cooperators, and actually animals also help each other all the time. And that's the thing that they prefer to do. Competition is sort of a second mode of interaction for them. So yeah, that has been a big debate. That literature is largely forgotten now. No one reads, well, they may read the selfish gene, but no biologist believes in the selfish gene anymore.
So, David, we have a question for you. So this cooperation aspect that you say has led to this hypothesis which has been called the So we want to play a short clip about what this hypothesis is. It's an audio clip, and I will stop in between and ask you a question.
Today, the religions with the most adherents around the world place a big emphasis on human morality, with omniscient deities capable of even seeing into our very thoughts. But it hasn't always been this way. Moralizing gods may have been rare in the ancient world, with deities taking little interest in the day-to-day lives of mere mortals. So how did moralizing religions become so common? Science correspondent Lizzie Wade investigated the big gods hypothesis, championed by University of British Columbia psychologists Ara Norenzayan and others. They posit that as societies grew, moralizing gods led to cooperation between strangers. I'm Suzanne Barr.
The big God hypothesis is trying to solve two puzzles at the same time. One is why moralizing gods have been so successful around the world. And the other puzzle is how humans manage to cooperate with strangers successfully enough to live in really, really big societies, which is something that no other animal does. So this hypothesis sort of ties those two aspects together and proposes that belief in moralizing gods is actually what gives us the cooperative push to be able to live and work with strangers without our own selfishness getting too much in the way.
What? So again, first of all, maybe comment on this hypothesis.
I think one of the problems with the big God theory is that it's based on one is that based on Abrahamic model of religion. Big God in the skies who are controlling us, or that we have to obey. But there's a question about the origins of religion there as well. There are many religions that aren't like them at all, like Buddhism or even Chinese, which is atheistic and so on. Some of the oldest religions of humankind don't have big gods, so you have to have some other kind of mechanism of explanation. And I suspect that it's not to do with sort of internalization of morality in the sense that Moralism claims, but this is a big topic, but it's to do with a fundamental pro-sociality that we have. It's to do with evolution in the sense that we have genetic evolution, but we also have cultural evolution. We have niche construction, the construction of a human niche. And I think religion is fundamental to the construction of a human niche that produces us who we are. And that fundamental to that is our pro-sociality and the transformation of pro-sociality through cultural means, particularly face-to-face interaction. So the face-to-face, I think, is much more fundamental to religion than any big God theory. And the face-to-face is fundamentally about empathy and pro-sociality. Then it's mediated through language, through culture, and fed back into that biological base in the sense of control of who we have face-to-face interactions with, who we can marry, who we can't marry, what we can eat, what we can't eat, and this kind of thing. So I suspect that it's religion is something to do with the transformation of our pro-sociality at a cultural level. And it's fundamentally also to do with, I think, with our imitative behaviour. We were talking about, Frans de Waal the other day talked about imitation. There was only a few days ago, somebody was telling me that archaeologists in South Africa who've been working on a new species that they found, a Nelendi, Homo Nelendi, and they're tool users. And they think that with the species Homo, you get two times the mutation, emulative, or emulative, where someone shows you what to do, and you go and do it yourself, and you make your own version of what they showed you. And imitative is where you copy precisely what they have done, what they have showed you, what they have taught you. And you think, which is the human, you think it's going to be emulative, isn't it? Innovative. But no, apparently it's the imitative, where you closely follow what you've been taught. And this is the unique apparent of the species Homo. And they know this by the amount of detritus and also the tools that are being chapped. And so, where am I going with this? Yeah, so you know that we're an imitative we all gathered together in an apprenticeship situation 180,000 years ago, chipping flints and so on. And it takes about, I don't know, 50 to 1,000 flints or something to strip a carcass. And so you have to have this apprenticeship process of making flints in that collective situation. And language is not far from that, because language is like a tool, words are like tools. And once you've got language from that, extended from that situation, you get religion coming in through language and through the extension of the process of language that we fundamentally are. And I think that's a more interesting avenue of exploration than the big God theory, which is based on a fairly narrow understanding of what religion is.
Yes, I'm also very skeptical of this. I don't think it holds water at all. First of all, the advent of these moralizing big gods comes far too late. After all, agrarian and urban civilizations where people are surrounded by strangers had existed for thousands of years before these religions arose. So saying that they arose in order to allow people to cooperate, to me makes no sense. And of course there are still many societies without them, where people cooperate just fine. My own view is that the more ancient human religions, the smaller ones, the local ones, why is it that they have been almost completely wiped out over the entire face of the earth in the last few thousand years? Why? Because some new ones arose with different characteristics. They are absolutist and aggressive. So when you used to have tens of thousands of religions all over the world, where every valley and village had their own religion and their own spirits and so on, and you met someone from the other valley and you say, oh, who's your spirit? Oh, the tree. Oh, mine's the sun. So what? Because the tree and the sun didn't tell them, I'm the only one, and everyone else is wrong. But when these modern religions arose, which were absolutist, which claimed to be universal, it's not a coincidence, that it's those religions which swept across the earth and eradicated all of the local religions that used to exist everywhere, in Europe, in South America, in Africa, and so on.
Perhaps in India.
Indeed, I'm not saying the entire earth, but I'm saying most of it. Yeah.
I guess kind of peripheral to this, but essential to the discussion is the sort of origin of this big God idea, and kind of the idea of helping strangers. The hypothesis here is that if you have a large society that's full of strangers, these kinds of moral rules that comes from religion helps the large society work together. And so, Frans, I wonder if I could direct to you kind of the converse of that. Are there situations where animals cooperate with strangers, or animals help strangers?
Yeah, it exists. The thing is that Noah Zion's idea about the big gods, if you skip the big god part, there is a problem, is that small-scale societies of, let's say, 50 people, or 50 chimpanzees for that matter, they can build a cooperative system, an even moral system, just based on face-to-face interaction, where I know what you have done for me yesterday, or where I built a reputation and everyone knows that I'm a good guy or a bad guy. So in these face-to-face interactions, everything works fine. Then, when these societies start moving to bigger scale, and this did not happen with chimps. The chimps still live in societies of 50 to 100 chimps. But humans started moving to societies of 1,000 or several thousand. Then that whole mechanism starts to fall apart. The face-to-face interaction moral system starts to fall apart because there's too many individuals to keep track of. What Noah Zion tries to do is to explain how is it possible that we moved from this small-scale cooperative system to a large-scale one, and he thinks religion was important in that, because religion gave us a motivation, sort of external motivations to be on our best behavior. And yes, he postulates that is because we had big gods, but it is also that these big religions are moralizing. The small religions were not very moralizing, They were more preoccupied with natural forces like rain and hunger and the circumstances. They were not necessarily moralizing in the sense that they were occupied with, do you lead a good life and do you help others and things like that. So that's the transition still needs to be explained. Even if you don't believe in the big God hypothesis, we still need to think about how did we move from small-scale societies to large-scale societies and remain cooperative. What is the enforcement mechanism? Because being cooperative needs to have some enforcement. And
that's the argument. The argument
yeah.
that the enforcing mechanism is an omniscient deity who exists. So there's no policing required externally which allows the society to grow bigger and bigger. That's fundamentally his argument. So again, are there examples of religions or currently practiced or maybe not currently practiced, but which don't emphasize so much on moral standpoint or moral framework which you should follow, but it's still a religious framework?
Yes, I think there are. The oldest form of